This video is brought to you by Surfshark VPN. To send men to the firing squad, judicial proof is unnecessary. These procedures are an archaic bourgeois detail. This is a revolution, and a revolutionary must become a cold, killing machine motivated by pure hate. We must create the pedagogy of the kereddin. This is a quote that was uttered by the evil, monstrous revolutionary figure Ernesto Che Guevara, who supposedly would take breaks from eating babies every now and then to cook up callous, cold passages like this. Or at least that's what his detractors want you to believe. But honestly, they want you to believe a whole bunch of unsubstantiated bullshit about him.
Che Guevara said, there's a direct quote from Che, this piece of crap.
Che Guevara? Was he the Cuban guy?
Said to send men to the firing squad, judicial proof is unnecessary, is what Che Guevara said.
Che, the revolutionary, he once executed a 12-year-old for being too anti-revolutionary.
And a revolutionary must become a cold killing machine motivated by pure hate. We must create a pedagogy of the kereddin, that's the execution wall.
Shot him in the face, bro.
From apparently shooting 12-year-olds to teaching people life lessons through the utilization of the execution wall, some of these accusations are so cartoonishly evil that it shouldn't take you long to sense that something is up. And it goes beyond just fabricating stories about the guy. It's become a pastime for his detractors to completely make up quotes and then attribute them to him. For example, this one, "We are going to do for blacks what blacks did for the revolution," by which I mean nothing, is thrown around willy-nilly despite there being no primary source to substantiate it, and despite the fact that Che's actions contradict it. From sacrificing his personal safety to aid in Congolese liberation movements when he could have just retired with a comfortable government job in Havana, to denouncing apartheid at the UN, to fighting racism and segregation in Cuba immediately after his revolutionary government assumed power, this quote does not comport with the historical record. But of all the horseshit quotes attributed to Che Guevara, none is more infamous than this one, the one we started the video with and the one we're tackling today. This quotation holds a special place in my heart for two reasons. First, it's constantly being hurled at me on Twitter and in my YouTube comments by Che haters who seem to have an aversion to doing their own research and actually verifying the information they spread. And secondly, despite all the work I've done debunking the various lies surrounding Che and Cuban history, I've never actually taken the time to properly deconstruct this fabricated quote the way I've always wanted to. So today we're going to do just that. We'll talk about where this quotation comes from, how it was constructed by taking pieces of real Che Guevara writings and blending them with either hyperbolic retellings of his life or just straight up fabrications, forming this apocryphal Frankenstein of a passage. Just to let you know from the jump, this video is not actually about Che Guevara, and my goal here isn't really to defend him. I've already done so in great detail in my past videos, and I don't want to repeat myself here. But for those who may have missed those past videos of mine and still hold unchallenged and incorrect beliefs about Che being a mass murderer or whatever, please allow this quote from John Lee Anderson, the foremost scholar on Guevara who wrote the definitive account of his life, suffice. I have yet to find a single credible source pointing to a case where Che executed an innocent. Those persons executed by Guevara or on his orders were condemned for the usual crimes punishable by death at times of war or in its aftermath: desertion, treason, or crimes such as rape, torture, or murder. I should add that my research spanned 5 years and included anti-Castro Cubans among the Cuban-American exile community in Miami and elsewhere. Anderson also notes in his book on the matter that Che was scrupulous about weighing the evidence when dealing with the tribunals he oversaw in the wake of the revolution, and that he didn't come to his decisions lightly when dishing out justice, despite the fact that the population wanted the war criminals from the past US-backed dictatorial regime punished immediately. But like I said, this video is not about that. It's about media literacy. My goal is to show you guys how an untruth, either an embellishment or even a complete fabrication, can be propagated with ease and believed by so many, even well-intentioned, individuals. So for the remainder of this video, I will trace down the origin of this quote, explain how it was assembled, and how it was propagated to the point of being a mainstream, supposed Che Guevara quote. But first, a word from today's sponsor, Surfshark. When I'm making these research-heavy videos about global history and political figures, using a VPN is honestly essential. For example, while researching Che Guevara and how he's discussed in the country of his death, Bolivia, I was able to access local websites and get a perspective from people geographically closer to his story. As longtime viewers know, my content focuses heavily on imperialism and its impact on the global south, with an emphasis on Latin America, Africa, and Asia. But being based in Canada can sometimes limit access to region-specific content, something Surfshark helps me get around with over 4,500 servers in 140 locations. Aside from letting you access articles and even films or other programs that might be unavailable in your country, Surfshark also helps protect your online identity by encrypting your data, keeping your personal information safe from corporations and hackers waiting for you to connect to public Wi-Fi. It also masks your IP so your browsing activity isn't easily tracked. On top of that, it can block ads, trackers, malware, and phishing attempts. And Surfshark has a strict no logs policy, meaning they don't track what you do online. Head on over to surfshark.com/overzealots or use code overzealots to get an extra 4 months. Now back to the video. This man right here is Humberto Fontova. He's an author, blogger, political commentator, polemicist, and a member of the Cuban exile community in the US. He didn't start his career as a political historian, a scholar, a researcher, or anything of the sort. He started his career by building a public persona based on obnoxious, macho posturing and outdoor blood sports. He would write for magazines like Louisiana Sportsman and Bowhunter, and his early books reflected these interests of his. In 2001, he published The Helldiver's Rodeo, a deadly extreme scuba diving spearfishing adventure amid the offshore platforms in the murky waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Pretty much all of his books boast ridiculous titles, by the way. But this 2001 release was actually greeted with some praise from figures in his niche. Publishers Weekly called it entertaining, and the Times-Picayune dubbed it an orgy of political incorrectness. That's awesome. I'm so happy this guy ended up LARPing as a historian and covering super sensitive topics. In 2003, he followed up with another book called The Hell Pig Hunt, a hunting adventure in the wild wetlands at the mouth of the Mississippi River by middle-aged lunatics who refused to grow up. A book about hunting feral hogs that was equally edgy and filled with performative machismo. So much so that by 2001, Fontova was regularly appearing on Bill Maher's television program, Politically Incorrect. Now, what I've told you thus far isn't really that much of an issue. So what? A guy used to be a bombastic, braggadocious douchebag entertainer, and then he decided to get into journalism and history. There's no law prohibiting that, and it's kind of pretentious to act as though someone with his background could never put forth substantive work in the fields of history or politics. But the issue with Fontova is that he pretty much just transposed his established, edgy, rhetorical style onto his historical subjects. The same aggressive, mocking tone he took in his earlier books about skinning deers and shooting boars with the boys was soon weaponized against Fidel Castro or Che Guevara or the American political left as a whole. Here's a couple of examples for you. In The Hell Pig Hunt, a hunting adventure in the wild wetlands at the mouth of the Mississippi River by middle-aged lunatics who refuse to grow up, Fontova tells a story of his college-aged daughter who threatens to sue him for abuse based on what her sociology professor taught her, and Humberto retorts, "To hell with that dingbat. Probably a D-word, too. Now get me some more wine." There's also the time when someone breaks into his house and his first thought is not fear nor the safety of his family. Rather, he is thrilled about the prospect of being able to legally kill someone. When his sister-in-law tells him not to shoot the intruders, he goes, "The hell with that." He likes to start a lot of sentences with that, by the way. "The hell with that. I'm gonna shoot up a storm. Not every day you get to jump on some scumbags and a legal excuse to splatter their guts around. The saps had no idea they were walking into a goddamn armory. Ha! Can't wait to see their eyes when they look down this barrel. I'll scatter their brains all over my den. Hell, we're insured." Now, this on its own is not really a big deal, but take a look at his rhetoric when he's dealing with serious historical figures. It doesn't change. When Fidel got going, Che Guevara would shrink up in a corner like a whimpering little puppy. I almost felt sorry for that Argentine assassin, jackass, and, as became increasingly evident, wimp. Or this one. Che Guevara was monumentally vain and epically stupid. He was shallow, boorish, cruel, and cowardly. He was full of himself, a consummate fraud and an intellectual vacuum. He was intoxicated with a few vapid slogans, spoken cliches, and was a glutton for publicity. But he did come out nice in a couple of publicity photos, high cheekbones and all, and we wonder why he's a hit in Hollywood. Or, Che was a revolutionary Ringo star who, by pure chance, fell in with the right bunch and rode their coattails to world fame. I hope you guys can see this is a questionable guy to be learning history from. He's extremely mad all the time. He's a fucking grump. He's belligerent, and he's so obviously bitter and emotional to the point where he can't possibly be a reliable source. It's so bad that when author Rolf Potts reviewed one of his books, He rightfully described it as slightly schizophrenic. But Humberto's emotional disposition aside, the real issue with his work is that his methodology is flawed. He relies almost entirely on uncorroborated exile testimonies and anecdotal accounts, without cross-referencing them against archival evidence or applying any of the basic methodological safeguards historians use to account for bias, memory, and ideological distortion. A consequence of this behavior is that Fontova ends up acting not as a rigorous historian, but as a stenographer for Cuban exiles who lost a political battle and fled the island. Maybe they were plantation owners, or friends of the Batista regime, or maybe something else entirely. Not all oral testimonies are reliable. In fact, in the context of the Cuban Revolution, uncorroborated exile testimonies are notoriously unreliable, and this phenomenon is well documented by historians and even CIA officials like Robert D. Chapman, who himself is not a fan of Che and Castro and is anti-communist. He's a CIA agent, for fuck's sakes. But Chapman served extensively in Cuba during the revolution, and he has written reviews about Cuban exile literature and its inherent unreliability. In his review of Fontova's Exposing the Real Che Guevara and the Useful Idiots Who Idolize Him, another wonderfully titled banger from our boy, Chapman writes, "In the United States, the Cuban Revolution is written mainly from the loser's perspective. I have long wondered whether this is a certain genre of exile writings, with readers left to separate anger and exaggeration from truth. Having served in Cuba with the CIA during those hectic times, my views are both personal and experiential. During the 1950s Cuban Revolution, a source would report to me the sighting of a guerrilla force of 100 men. Through experience, I learned to divide the sighted number by 5 and know that even 20 was too high, and I would shade the figure to 15 or 17. In most cases, it too was too high. I would be told that the government had killed a local Cuban businessman and run over his dead body with a truck. I wrote a report of his horrific murder and the next day met the reported victim in the coffee shop. I hurried to the office to retrieve the report from the outgoing mail. These were not uncommon events." See, Fontova is a member of the Cuban diaspora in America, and his primary motivation is a political one. He selectively seeks out exaggerated testimonies from other exiles and presents them as fact without doing the due diligence of corroborating. He treats emotionally charged testimonies from people who lost a political battle, the Cuban Revolution, which had the support of up to 90% of the population, by the way, as fact. As a result, his body of work is entirely insulated from academic peer review, and his books are published by weird conservative imprints. He has such little respect in the fields of academia, journalism, and history that other serious scholars want little to do with him. He spends his time picking fights with serious and actually accredited scholars like the aforementioned John Lee Anderson, who had unprecedented access to Cuban archives and classified personal writings of Che Guevara, and who authored what is considered the authoritative biography on Che. I mean, not even Wikipedia editors want Fontova's works used as a source because he's so obnoxiously unreliable and sloppy. With a quick glimpse at the archive of past discussions regarding the Wikipedia page for Che Guevara, you can see the editors literally comparing Fontova's books to Holocaust denial and flat earth theory. Not exactly the most credible guy. Now, I'm sure you guys can guess where I'm going with this. In the year 2004, our boy Humberto wrote a piece called Che Guevara, Assassin and Bumbler, and it starts off by talking about the book Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and its creator, Lewis Carroll. Fontova goes on to elaborate on the world that Lewis Carroll concocted by calling it a place where the sentence comes first and the verdict afterward, where people who protest the madness are sentenced to death themselves. What lunacy. And in case it isn't yet obvious, Fontova is comparing the fantasy realm of Carroll's book to post-revolutionary Cuba under Fidel Castro. Fontova literally goes on to say that if Lewis Carroll could teleport to 1959 Cuba, he would have heard Che Guevara say, "To send men to the firing squad, judicial proof is unnecessary. These procedures are an archaic bourgeois detail. This is a revolution, and a revolutionary must become a cold killing machine motivated by pure hate. We must create the pedagogy of the kereddin, the execution wall." And that is the first ever appearance of the now infamous quote attributed to Che, a seemingly hypothetical situation thought up by Humberto Fontova where the author of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, Lewis Carroll, time travels to 1959 Cuba and overhears Che say some cartoonishly evil shit. Fontova doesn't even seem to be trying to present this quote as a historical reality. It reads like he's just dramatizing and setting the stage for his hit piece article. He provides no citation, no context for the supposed Che quote, no primary Spanish text, no date. He doesn't mention who relayed this information to him, where or why Che supposedly said this, or anything at all. It's literally a fictitious quote that he concocted in a hypothetical scenario where a guy who died in 1898 time travels to 1959 Cuba and overhears Che utter some bloodthirsty shit, all to set the tone for his dog shit essay. Now, when you inform a Che Guevara detractor about the dubious origin of this fictitious quote, they will almost never concede that they were wrong. Instead, they'll typically move the goalposts and argue that certain parts of this fictitious quote are based on Che's writings and speeches. This is a completely different argument than presenting the original quote as something Che wrote or said, and it does hold some truth. This passage is the result of blending together complete fabrications with real but entirely decontextualized and embellished Guevara quotes. So for this part of the video, I will trace down the origins of all the pieces of this fake passage and show you how it was thought up and assembled, how the quote was constructed. Part 1. To send men to the firing squad, judicial proof is unnecessary. These procedures are an archaic, bourgeois detail. This is a revolution, is the first leg of this fictitious Che Guevara quote. Now, despite exhaustive searches into Che Guevara's diaries, writings, private letters, and speeches, this exact quote does not appear anywhere. That's because it's not really something Che said. These few sentences are completely fabricated and are Fontova's attempt to summarize oral testimonies of Cuban exiles into a fictionalized blurb. This is something he does. He will rely heavily on the uncorroborated word of individuals who fled Cuba and present their emotionally charged testimonies as fact. Remember what we said earlier when discussing ex-CIA agent Robert Chapman. These oral testimonies come from individuals who found themselves on the losing end of a popular revolution. Obviously, this doesn't apply to everyone who left Cuba, but it's a notable phenomenon. These people are often emotionally driven, and as Chapman recounted for us, highly uncredible and inclined to lie. That's why corroborating these testimonies is what separates a real historian from an Humberto Fontova, whose main objective is to amplify diaspora grievances. When we take a look at the credible works in the field of the Cuban Revolution, we find that Che Guevara was actually very careful as to not execute people without fair deliberation, and that those who were dealt the death penalty were the worst war criminals of the Batista regime, guilty of rape, murder, and torture. According to Anderson, the Cuban public was in a lynching mood in the aftermath of the revolution and thought that the tribunals were too benign. Yet Che acted as a moderating figure. He was highly meticulous so as to ensure that no one was wrongfully executed, and he even prevented personal vengeance by explicitly forbidding any rebels who had been mistreated or tortured under Batista from passing judgment on their former tormentors. Che instructed his team to moderate the more bloodthirsty prosecutors, who always asked for death, and he assured that every case was deeply analyzed and required witness testimonies. And in case you think Anderson is some communist or Marxist source, he's not. He's a guy who has described his past works as straight down the center, and he's even criticized the political left for clinging on to romantic notions. He's just a serious scholar who actually treats his craft with the respect it deserves. I say all of this to say, the first leg of this fictitious quote is not only a complete unsourced fabrication inspired by unreliable oral testimonies of Cuban exiles, but it's actually contradicted by the historical record. Part 2. And a revolutionary must become a cold, killing machine motivated by pure hate. This is the only part of the quote that is actually derived from Che's writings, but unfortunately for his haters, it's bastardized and decontextualized to a point where it doesn't relay its original meaning at all. This quote is derived from something Che wrote in his very well-known text, Message to the Tricontinental. In this piece, Che is calling upon the exploited peoples of the world to fight back against their tormentors and oppressors. He invokes the revolutionary spirit and the resilience of the Vietnamese and argues that all oppressed peoples of the world should take notes. This essay is a call to resist imperialism, exploitation, and colonialism through solidarity and armed struggle. Che rightfully assesses that the enemy of the exploited peoples of the global south is imperialism, and he urges that the oppressed fight back against their oppressors. It's a call to self-defense first and foremost. With that context out of the way, Here is the real, authentic Che Guevara quote that Fontova bastardized. "The beginnings will not be easy. They shall be extremely difficult. All the oligarchy's powers of repression, all their capacity for brutality and demagoguery will be placed at the service of their cause. Our mission in the first hour shall be to survive. Later, we shall follow the perennial example of the guerrilla, carrying out armed propaganda, in the Vietnamese sense, that is, the bullets of propaganda, of the battles won or lost but fought against the enemy. The great lesson of the invincibility of the guerrillas taking root in the dispossessed masses, the galvanizing of the national spirit, the preparation for harder tasks, for resisting even more violent repressions, hatred as an element of the struggle, a relentless hatred of the enemy, impelling us over and beyond the natural limitations that man is heir to and transforming him into an effective, violent, selective, and cold-killing machine. Our soldiers must be thus. A people without hatred cannot vanquish a brutal enemy." In Fontova's version, the phrase, cold-killing machine motivated by pure hate, is stripped from its context where Che is explicitly arguing from a position of self-defense. And even then, Fontova finds a way to make it sound psychotic and cruel by rewording Che's original text and even omitting important words, like selective. In Che's original text, he argues that those fighting back against their oppressors need to feel a sense of hate in order to fully vanquish a brutal and aggressive enemy and defend themselves. But Che also argues that one needs to be a selective killing machine. By removing that one word, Fontova makes it seem as though Che is out here indiscriminately killing, when that's actually the complete opposite of what Che wrote. He wrote about selectivity and precision in the face of repelling foreign aggression. This is a very clear example of Fontova being a dishonest actor. It's funny because I often get comments and tweets from people who send me Che's message to the Tricontinental and argue that Fontova's made-up Che quote exists in it, which is honestly just kind of sad because it shows that these people can't even take 15 minutes to read an extremely short essay. I mean, look at this shit. It's well documented that Che ordered and participated in executions. Quote, "To send men to the firing squad, judicial proof is unnecessary. A revolution must become a cold-killing machine motivated by pure hate." That's a direct quote from Che. Source it then. Che Guevara message to the Tricontinental. Did you even read this? The quote does not appear in it. You know it's a real quote, you're just choosing not to believe it. The Ministry of Truth would love you. Post it then. I like how you went from Che never killed anyone to prove this quote. I know it's sourced from a book, but Che never wrote it down himself, so it's fake. All you have to do is prove that the quote exists in the essay you sourced. You have to prove that Che wasn't a killing machine. And to be fair, John is far from the only idiot to do this. But it's important that those of us who actually care about the truth are equipped to deal with these people. Part 3. We must create the pedagogy of the kereddin. I don't even know what to say here, man. There's literally no source for this anywhere. It doesn't exist in any of Guevara's writings or speeches. It's just a complete fabrication circulated by Cuban exiles like Fontova, who present no primary source or information about where or when Che supposedly said this. And as we've already gone over, it's historically inaccurate. Che was not indiscriminately killing people, and the tribunals he oversaw were handled with professionalism and care, according to serious scholars on the matter like Anderson and historian Paco Ignacio Taibo II, who notes that the civilian tribunal didn't even pass death sentences. Only the military one did. This means that the only people sentenced to death by Guevara and his team were literally Batista militants or police officers guilty of horrific crimes against humanity that would carry a death penalty almost anywhere else. About 1 year after Fontova published Assassin and Bumbler and brought this fabricated quote into existence, another interesting figure, T.O.A. Babun, was finishing up his own book about Cuba. Babun is also a Cuban-American exile with a strong dislike for the Cuban government. He's a businessman, human rights advocate, and evangelical philanthropist, and in 2005, he and his co-author, historian Victor Andrés Trier, published The Cuban Revolution, Years of Promise. Now, this book stays true to the tradition of Cuban exile literature insofar as it is poorly sourced, sloppily put together, and primarily motivated by the author's priors. And the reason I say this is because on page 57 of the book, there's a quote attributed to Che Guevara that reads, "To send men to the firing squad, judicial proof is unnecessary. These procedures are an archaic bourgeois detail. This is a revolution, and a revolutionary must become a cold killing machine motivated by pure hate. We must create the pedagogy of the kereddin. And when you check the citation for this supposed Guevara quote, you're directed to Humberto Fontova's Assassin and Bumbler. I hope I don't have to explain how monumental this is. Here you have a book written by a so-called philanthropist, human rights advocate, and a purported historian who, knowingly or not, pulled a slanderous fabricated quote from an essay written by a complete crackpot who himself provided no citation for the quote in the original essay. This is a perfect example of how a total fabrication, birthed out of nothing but ideology and bitterness, can be academically laundered by equally unserious and nefarious actors who just so happen to boast credentials but fail to use them responsibly. Once this quote appeared in a published book, it was scraped and indexed by online databases and quote repositories like Goodreads and WikiQuote. Though, to WikiQuote's credit, it actually does flag this as an unsourced passage that shouldn't be taken seriously. But that disclaimer does not stop figures like Ben Shapiro or our boy John or anyone else whose mind is already made up about Guevara from amplifying an apocryphal quote. By simply searching the quote on Google, you'll be greeted with countless articles and blog posts propagating this lie from smaller, lesser-known outlets like whatever this is, the Classical Historian and the 15-Minute History Podcast, which even claims Guevara wrote this somewhere, but fails to tell us where. Shocking. To massive political pundits like Ben Shapiro, all the way down to debate forums and comment sections on Reddit and YouTube. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's this. Always double check and research the things your favorite creators and political pundits tell you. And that includes me. Don't just take us at our word. And when someone attributes a quote, a crime, or anything else to a historical figure, always ask for a source so you can actually go and verify for yourself. Before I go, I want to let you know that I have a weekly podcast that I started kind of recently, and in it we talk about current and historical events and occasionally bring on some great guests. We recently did a couple episodes about Cuban history and Cuban involvement in Angola, if you want to check those out. Huge thanks to my patrons on Patreon for making these high quality videos possible, and a special written thanks to my top tier patrons. If you want access to my scripts and source material in an organized format, along with other perks, consider becoming a patron. Thanks again to Surfshark VPN for sponsoring the video, and make sure to click below to take advantage of the deal.